All right, everybody, get ready. Because today we are going way back to 1973.
That's right, 1973.
Think, bell bottoms, big hair, disco fever,
Oh, yeah.
and surprisingly, some really good advice for navigating our crazy world here in 2024.
It's kind of wild how these anxieties from, like, decades ago, they still feel so relevant today.
Totally. So we are diving into this address from 1973 from Harold B. Lee, who was, at that time, the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, and this isn't just some, like, old speech that's totally irrelevant now. This address, title's kind of a mouthful. It's called Follow the Leadership of the Church.
Tatchy.
But it's seriously packed with some wisdom on dealing with change, figuring out information overload.
Oh, tell me about it. My inbox is overflowing as we speak.
Right. It's like he was writing this for us today. And even on top of all that, he talks about spotting misinformation.
Which, let's be real, that's like the story of 2024.
Seriously. It's kind of uncanny how much President Lee was speaking to a generation that was dealing with so much uncertainty, just like ours.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it back then. The Vietnam War was ending. There were all these social changes happening all over the place.
People were looking for something solid to hold on to.
Yeah, exactly. And so President Lee, he kicks off this address. He's talking about this big shift happening within the church. It was kind of like a reorganization.
Big changes.
Yeah, and he tells people, don't jump to conclusions. Don't be a Monday morning quarterback about this whole thing. He says, ponder it.
Ponder. That's a
Yeah.
good word. It's such a key point here because he's not saying just blindly accept everything you're told.
Yeah.
He's encouraging people to actually sit with it, to really think about it.
Yeah. Like, hit pause on that nonstop barrage of news and opinions and really, truly think about something for a second.
I mean, I know I could use a little more pondering time in my life, that's for sure.
Me too.
Yeah.
Especially with how fast things move today. It's like 1 minute, it's this huge viral trend.
And the next.
Gone. You know how it is.
Oh, I know. It's about choosing to be thoughtful instead of just having a knee-jerk reaction like we see everywhere online.
Seriously.
And speaking of getting caught up in the latest big thing, President Lee actually mentioned something in this address that was all the rage back in '73.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Pyramid prophecies.
Okay. You've got to tell me more. Pyramids.
Yeah, pyramids.
Okay.
People were using those ancient structures to predict, well, basically everything. Global turmoil,
Yeah.
The end of the world, you name it.
So it was like pyramid mania back then?
Oh, yeah, total pyramid mania. And President Lee, he used this whole craze, actually, as kind of a cautionary tale.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying it's kind of like our obsession with, like, conspiracy theories today.
Exactly. It's so easy to get stuck in those echo chambers, just believing whatever confirms what we already think,
Oh, totally.
And what President Lee was getting at was, you got to be careful about who you're getting your truth from, because some sources are just trying to stir things up or push their own agenda.
It's like that old saying, don't believe everything you read on the internet.
It's so true. And it's amazing how relevant his advice from back then is for us today. Be careful about who you trust. Watch out for people who are pushing their own agendas.
Yeah, do your research.
Exactly.
So it's not all doom and gloom, though, right?
Yeah.
Because he also talks about this idea of magnifying your responsibilities, especially within the church.
Yeah, and that might sound a little specific to, a religious context.
Right.
But actually, I think there's a really powerful message about leadership in there that applies to all of us.
Oh, I like that. So you're saying there's like a secular version of this magnifying idea.
Absolutely. What he's saying is that it's not about the position or the title. It's bigger than that. It's about how you approach any responsibility.
Okay.
It applies at work, in our communities, in our families.
So it's not about what you do, but how you do it.
That's it.
Okay, I'm very curious to hear more about this. But first, for those of us who might not be familiar with how the church works, can you explain what he means by magnifying priesthood responsibilities? What does that actually mean?
Sure. So in the church, those who hold the priesthood, they're called to be like representatives of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
They're supposed to serve others and use God's authority to do good. And it's not just like checking off a box or something. It's about doing these things with the right intention.
So you're saying it's about bringing like a deeper meaning to whatever you're doing.
Exactly. And you know what? He tells this really great story that illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, I love a good story. Lay it on me.
So he was talking to this group of young boys who were getting ready to become deacons in the church.
Yeah.
And one of the main things a deacon does is help with what's called the sacrament, which is basically blessing and passing the bread and water to everyone during the service.
Right, right. I remember those days. Getting all dressed up for that felt so official.
Yeah.
Well, except for the times I tripped and spilled the water trays.
Yeah.
Well, we don't need to talk about that.
We've all been there. But, that's actually what President Lee noticed about these boys. They were so focused on the mechanics of passing the sacrament.
Like, don't drop the tray, don't drop the tray.
Exactly. That they were kind of missing the point.
They weren't seeing the bigger picture.
Right. He wanted them to understand that they weren't just boys carrying trays,
Right. They were representing something way bigger.
Yes.
And that's what I think is so cool about this whole thing. This doesn't just apply to some religious practice.
Right. It's about how we approach anything we do, whether it's leading a team at work, volunteering in our communities.
Or even just doing the dishes, right?
It's about showing up and being present.
Yes. It's not about the task itself, but the energy you bring to it. Are you present? Are you intentional? That's how we magnify those everyday roles.
It's about bringing intention to literally everything we do.
Exactly. And that's a message that, honestly, I think we need now more than ever. And it reminds me of another point President Lee made that feels super relevant today.
Yeah. What's that?
He talks about some of the challenges of his time, and honestly, they haven't gone away.
Like, what kinds of challenges?
He talks about the dangers of, like, pornography and what he calls this permissiveness in society.
And even though it looks different now because of, the internet and everything, those issues are still here. They still affect us.
Totally.
So we talk about building strong homes, strong families. He says we need to create these safe spaces that are like a haven from all the chaos in the world.
I love that. It's about fortifying your foundation so you're strong enough to handle whatever life throws at you.
That's a great way to put it. It's about controlling what you can control, And a huge part of that is creating those relationships, those spaces, those communities that are going to be there for you no matter what.
Because when you have that strong inner circle, you're less likely to get pulled in a million different directions, right?
Exactly. You can weather the storm. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. He ties this idea of creating those strong foundations. He connects it directly to leadership. He basically says that the people who are really trying to live their values, the ones who are putting in the effort to strengthen their families and communities, they're the ones who are really prepared to lead.
It's like he's saying, don't just complain about the problems, be part of the solution.
Yes. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. He talks about how if you see people constantly criticizing leadership, always questioning, always doubting, but their actions don't line up with their words.
It's all talk and no action.
Exactly. Then it might be a sign that their heart's not really in it.
It's like that saying, you can't draw water from an empty well. You can't lead others if you're not taking care of your own stuff.
You got it. He's calling for a real, genuine integrity.
Walk the walk. Don't just talk the talk.
And it got me thinking about the people I know who have actually made a difference, like a real difference. It's not the ones who are always the loudest.
Right. It's the people who get things done.
Yeah, it's the ones who are quietly, consistently living those values. Yeah. And that's what has a real impact.
They lead by example.
Yes.
Wow. That's a pretty powerful statement.
It really is.
Yeah.
And at first it might seem like he's just talking about like following the rules in a church setting.
Right. Like be a good member, do what you're told.
Yeah, exactly. But I think he's actually pointing to something much deeper here.
Okay.
He's highlighting this really interesting link between personal integrity and being truly committed and real leadership.
So you're saying that like living your values is a form of leadership?
Yes. Because when you live your values, it sets an example. And when you set an example, you inspire other people. Think about the people you really admire, the ones you look up to.
The ones who actually walk the walk, not just talk about it.
Exactly. And that kind of authenticity, it shines through no matter who you are or what you believe.
That's so true.
It really makes you think about how we approach leadership in a world where everyone's trying to get our attention, right? And you know what? This is something that President Lee actually spoke about back then, too.
Oh, wow. Well, I imagine back then things were a lot simpler when it came to information overload, like no social media, no 24/7 news cycle.
You would think, wouldn't you? But you'd be surprised. Even back then, he was talking about how dangerous it is when people glom onto these, like, sensationalized ideas and they start promoting their own agendas and using their platform. We're trying to get a platform just for their own game.
So basically the 1973 version of clickbait and clout chasing.
Yeah, pretty much. I guess some things never change, right? But what's interesting is that his advice back then is so relevant for us now. Be discerning. Be careful about who you listen to, and don't let just anything shape how you see the world. You got to question people's motives. You got to find sources you can trust, because it's so easy to get sucked into those echo chambers online.
For sure. And it's crazy to think he was talking about this stuff decades ago.
I know. But he didn't just point out the problems.
So what was his solution? Like, how did he say we should handle all of this?
He really emphasized personal responsibility, which might seem kind of, I don't know, old-fashioned these days.
Like, just use your best judgment.
Right. But it's more than that. It's not just about being careful. He's actually suggesting we do something about it. Like, he really stressed building up strong families and homes. He said we need to create these little pockets of strength and goodness, almost like shelters from all the crazy stuff happening outside.
I love that. It's like building your own little haven, a place where you can escape the noise and reconnect with what really matters.
Yes, exactly. You said it perfectly. It's about making sure you have a strong foundation so you're not constantly getting knocked around by every new trend or ideology that comes along.
Because if you have that strong inner compass, you're more likely to be able to see through the BS, right?
Yes, that's exactly it. It's about developing resilience so you don't just get blown over by every little wind that comes along. And you know what's really cool? He ties this directly to leadership.
Oh, how so?
Well, he basically says that the people who are really truly striving to live their values, the ones who are making the effort to strengthen their families and communities, those are the ones who are really equipped to lead.
It's like he's saying, don't just complain about how things are, be the change you want to see.
Precisely. It's about taking responsibility. And, he actually says something really interesting about this. He says that if you see people who are always criticizing their leaders, always questioning and doubting, but then their actions don't match their words.
Right.
That's a good indication that maybe, just maybe, their heart's not really in it.
It's all talk and no action.
Yep. He's calling for real, genuine integrity here. And it made me think about the people I've known who have really made a difference in the world, like a real, lasting impact. They weren't always the loudest ones in the room.
Yeah, they were probably too busy getting things done.
Exactly. It was always the ones who were quietly, consistently living their values day in and day out. That's what makes a real impact.
It's about leading by example.
Yes.
It's about recognizing that we all have that potential, right? That leadership potential.
Yeah.
It's not about some title or position. It's about the everyday choices we make.
It really is. And it's about showing up authentically. Like you said, it's those daily choices, trying to live those values, trying to make that positive impact. And you know what? This idea of leading by example, even when it's hard, even when it's not popular, it made me think of something else that President Lee said.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
He basically said that when you see people who are constantly criticizing leadership, always questioning everything, but their actions never seem to line up with their words, it might be a sign that their heart's not really in it.
It's like they're all talk.
Yeah, exactly.
No action. They're not willing to put in the work.
And he's not just talking about, church leadership here. This applies to any area of life.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether it's at work or in your family or even, just being a good friend.
Being a good human.
Exactly.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Yes. He's saying, live with integrity. And that really resonated with me. It made me think about the people I've known who have actually made a difference, and they weren't always the loudest ones in the room.
Right.
They were the ones who were just quietly, consistently living those values every single day.
It's like they create this aura of integrity.
Yeah.
It just draws people in.
Yeah.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground here today, from dealing with change and information overload to this idea of magnifying our purpose and leading with this quiet integrity. I mean, wow. What's your biggest takeaway from all of this? What are you going to be thinking about after this deep dive?
I think for me, it's that reminder that real leadership, it comes from within. It starts with us. It starts with each of us making that choice to be authentic, to be the change we want to see in the world. That's what really stuck with me.
It's about being the change.
Yeah.
And it's incredible to me that this message, from over 50 years ago, it still feels so relevant today.
It's timeless. And I think it reminds us that even though the world feels like it's constantly changing, there are some things that are always going to be important. Discernment, integrity, connection, purpose. Those are the principles that can guide us no matter what's going on around us.
It's like having a roadmap
Yes.
to navigate all the ups and downs of life. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm really curious, what are you going to take with you? What are you going to ponder? We would love to hear your thoughts.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, keep diving deep.